Hey, loves, you're listening to the Be Well, Beautiful People podcast, the show that inspires you to live your best joy filled life by centering healing and liberation above all. I'm your host, Damara West, and it is a privilege to be in sacred space with you all. For today's episode, we're honored to welcome Kevin McNeil, who is a transformational speaker, victim advocate, author, and founder CEO of the Twe12ve Project, Inc., which serves as a bridge to educate the world on the effects of trauma and abuse upon individuals, families, and communities. A retired Special Victims Unit detective with 20 years of service at the DeKalb County Police Department and survivor allows him to do deeply impactful work in part through his powerful storytelling that transforms, motivates, and inspires. His life's mission is to create communities across the globe where abuse and trauma survivors heal, thrive, and succeed. In today's episode, we're exploring the radical strength it not only takes to heal in a world that often looks the other way, but also how to transmute unbearable pain into unwavering, heartfelt purpose. But before we do, let's ground into this quote by Sean A. Ginwright. Healing is the only pathway to real justice because it requires that we take an honest look at what harmed us and pushes us to restore our humanity and finally to move us confidently into a possible future. Kevin, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. Yes, I love being here. Thank you. Thank you. And hello to all your
Absolutely.
guests.
Oh my gosh, as you know, as I said to you before we jumped into the interview, it's been a long time coming. I
Yeah.
was so moved by your keynote talk at the
Mhm.
Sexual Assault Kit Initiative Summit back in Lansing, Michigan. And, I
Okay.
shared with you at the end, I was tempted to leave early, but Spirit nudged me to stay. And
Uh-huh.
after hearing your message, I know
Yes.
exactly why I was pushed to be in sacred space with you. And I'm just delighted to share you with my audience and to see, what we get into today, because I know that it's going to be deeply, deeply impactful.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah, I love the fact that we share that sacred space. And all the time I speak, I always pray that someone's in the audience that will be touched and moved by my story, because every time I tell it, my healing goes even deeper. And so I share with audiences that I know will be impacted and they have something to share as well. So it's almost like a reciprocal process. As I share, they glean and they pour back into me as I share the story itself.
Yeah. Well, and we know, right, that the root to healing is rooted in reciprocity, right? The relationship
Yeah.
that we have with ourselves, the relationship that we have with practitioners is so critical to our work. And I love what you said, before we dive into our inquiries that, every single time that you share your story, you heal,
Mhm.
right?
Yes. Yes.
And this is so powerful because I know that, people are so reluctant to share their story and they take stories of pain sometimes to the grave. But knowing
Mhm.
that if we have the courage to just tell it, even to ourselves, and if we can do it from a repetitive standpoint every single time, it really helps us to rise. And so thank you for just starting us off so strong.
And it's also biblical. That's a biblical thing because, there's a scripture that says, confess ye your faults. It also says pain, that original context, original interpretation, to confess your pain one ye to another so that you may be healed.
Yeah.
So you don't hold on to that pain. It's meant to be
Mhm.
shared within a community setting, communal setting, that assists in healing.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, is this recognition that the minute that we face it, the minute we tell it, even to ourselves, is the minute that we can really begin the healing process and getting back to fullness, right?
Yeah.
Who we were always created to be before this pain set into our psyche.
Yeah.
Yeah, so let's first talk about the fact that you spent
Mhm.
20 years in law enforcement, including
Yeah.
12 in the Special Victims Unit.
Yeah.
That's a huge, huge commitment, right? And I
Yeah.
imagine
Yeah.
that you saw so many things. So,
Mhm.
talk to us about your journey to enter into this field, to come out of that field into this field.
Yeah, it was interesting because I was a military. I was in the military before that. At 17, I joined the military, and basically, I was just trying to get out of my hometown.
Mm,
Memphis, Tennessee was a very, I guess I could say it had a dark past for me because that's when my assault occurred. That's why I experienced all of my abuse. And subconsciously, I was just trying to get out of there. I didn't want to stay. It had too many bad memories for me. So the military was a way out for me. So when I joined the military, it was great at first. They sent me to Hawaii. I was enjoying my life in the military, but then I re-enlisted. They sent me to Kuwait. They sent me to Fort Stewart. And one of my friends came back and was like, "Hey, man, you might need to check out police officer if you want to get out." And that was down in Atlanta. And I signed up. The Cobb County Police Department hired me. Well, I loved it. Well, 8 years onto the job, I almost was murdered and killed while being a police officer.
Mm.
I got into a high-speed chase. Ended up chasing some guys who had just committed a murder, home invasion, and I had to use my service weapon to save my own life.
Mhm.
After that, I was going to quit the police force.
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
really considered it. I took a couple of days off, and one of my friends, again, come in it. Was I ever considering being a detective? I didn't know what a detective was or what type of work they did. I didn't know there was several different types. And then
Mhm.
I just put in for a detective, and they actually placed me where they needed me the most, which was special victims unit. I didn't pick it. I didn't. I would have probably never chose it. So they chose me to be in the special victims unit. Little beknownst to me that it was dealing with abuse. Now, mind you, before then, I never shared my story with anybody.
Mhm.
Nobody knew I was a survivor of abuse. Well, here I was walking into a special victims unit, and my first case was a case involving a little boy who had been abused. And so it
Mhm.
was like I was watching a forensic interview of something happened to a little boy, but it was like I was having my own first forensic interview for myself because I was watching a little boy get the care and concern and the love that I never got for myself. So it
Mhm.
was a real heartbreaking, but also a breakthrough at the same time. So the very first case I had became very, very pivotal and critical to my healing process itself.
Wow. Well, it makes me think about the universal law that, whatever we're seeking is seeking us.
Yeah.
And that, although consciously you wouldn't have set this out, not knowing, having this incident of this near-death experience, meandering into becoming a detective, not
Hmm.
knowing the multi-layers of what it would mean to be a detective, and then being
Yeah.
placed in a space where you were really forced to face yourself, starting with this young man, right? So what a beautiful story that is, because what it shows us is that God, universe, source, creator is always steering us in the direction of our deepest desires, even when we don't know that we're seeking healing. All of us are seeking healing if we've endured pain. And that,
Definitely.
as life unfolds, we're being given lots of opportunities to enter in, and not by virtue of, us being conscious in our thinking about it, right?
Yeah.
Usually
Yeah.
we happen upon these things
Mhm.
because these things are calling us, and it's so much rooted in our ability to be well for ourselves first, and then to also to be deeply effective in the work that we do.
Oh, definitely. I think pain is the pathway to purpose because I think if you look at my story, each one of those pathways was me running from pain. I was running from home from Memphis, went to military, got tired of the military, ran from that, and went into the police department. The pain from my shootout and almost murdered from police work led me to being a detective. And so I was running from my pain unconsciously, but it became the path to my purpose. And so oftentimes I'll draw a circle and ask people, where do you find God? Where do you find your purpose? And I'll draw pain in the middle of the circle. Most people put themselves outside. I put God, a purpose outside of the circle, and I put God and purpose inside of the circle. If you
Mm.
really want to find your purpose, you have to turn towards your pain. And so that's what really was happening unconsciously to me by me pursuing a career. I had to face those things that I was running from. And so my pain became the pathway to finding my purpose. And sitting there for the first time, I confronted that little boy that I had hid, and all the pain that was associated with my assault and my abuse in childhood had come back forth, and I began to face it head on.
Yeah. Well, and we use so many strategies to run.
Oh, yeah.
So many strategies.
Oh,
And,
yeah.
I'm working on my second book right now, which is called Love Will Liberate. And, It's
Hmm.
all about how the relationships that we have, starting with the relationships with ourselves, becomes the impotence behind how we become more into ourselves, how we attract
Hmm.
love, how we
Yeah.
give love. And knowing that trauma, our upbringing through our caregivers, really block us, right? Pain
Yeah.
blocks us from having secure attachments,
Oh
and we
yeah.
are designed, right,
Oh
to have
yeah.
secure attachments and to have lots of things in our lives that we are running away from as a
Hmm.
result of not wanting to deal with the pain, and understandably so, right?
Yeah.
Because the work of facing ourselves is the hardest work will ever do, but also the most worthwhile. And
Yeah.
so, Kevin, talk to us about, before you had this pivotal moment of
Hmm.
having this little boy, being in the special victims unit, and really seeing yourself reflected back through him. What was your life like before you were able to take a look at your trauma, before you stopped running?
Oh man, it was horrible, but I didn't know it. I was drinking, I was using all these coping mechanisms, drinking, sex, even work to kind of cope with the pain that I was going through, but I didn't know it. I was unconsciously doing it and I was functioning. I was surviving and I was functioning and I was doing pretty good at it. And so it wasn't until, things started falling apart that I knew that I needed help. I started, getting a divorce, that led to me understanding none of my relationships were working. So I turned to sex, having this sexual encounters, but knowing I couldn't find love. I was pushing people away. Then drinking became an issue. I became addicted to substances and things of that nature. So I was always finding myself going from one thing to another, addictive behavior, trying to cope, but I couldn't put two together. It wasn't until I saw that little boy, I realized that I wasn't a bad person. Something bad was happening to me, or something bad happened to me. And what happened with society and culture, people were judging me. You shouldn't drink. You shouldn't do this. You shouldn't do that. And they didn't understand that I was using these mechanisms to try to make myself feel wanted and make myself feel attractive again. Because here I was carrying around a body that I didn't want. At 12 years old, someone attacked me, forced me into a situation, introduced me to something that I didn't want. So I'm carrying around this body that I didn't want, but I was using as a token of affection because that's what was taken from me. And so now, I'm trying to compensate. And so now, before I really got that revelation, I was doing all these bad things. So people judge, society judge. So,
Yeah.
when after my attack as a 12-year-old, I became a different little boy. I went from, crying and complaining about being bullied to fighting, getting bad grades, and people said I was a bad person. So I took that,
Mhm.
and so that became my image, my identity. So what happened was, after I saw that little boy and went to therapy, and they introduced me this concept of trauma. And I started reading the material and started reading what was trauma, even being a police officer, even being in a special victims unit, investigating abuse cases. They didn't teach me about trauma. That was
Mm.
something I learned on my own, by going to therapy and started being more victim informed, not just trauma informed.
Yeah.
Oh, this made sense. Made sense why I could walk past that football stadium bleachers 4 years after my assault happened under those same bleachers and not even think about it. Now it made sense. Everything began to click. It makes sense to me now. I was surviving, not thriving. And so now healing became hard in the beginning. It hurt in the beginning,
Yeah.
but the longer I stayed with it, the more promising the healing became. And I
Mhm.
stuck with it and stuck with it. And out of that pain came wisdom. And that's what people hear me speaking from stages. It's not just I read a lot, know a lot. It's the pain speaking through me that connects with the audience members, and they can hear the wisdom coming through that little boy.
Yeah. So there's so much that I want to sparse out here. You
Mhm.
shared a lot of nuggets. First and foremost, acknowledging, and you talked about this during your talk, that we've reached a point in society where if we are being trauma informed, we ask the question of what happened to them, right? Not
Mhm.
what is wrong with them.
Yeah.
But something that I want to name really quickly about what you said, the leading up to the point of you being 12 and being sexually assaulted,
Mhm.
and the splitting that happened. You
Yeah.
didn't name that. There was a splitting that occurred
Oh
at
yeah.
that point in time.
Yeah.
You went from this very loving child to a
Mhm.
child that said that no one is going to be able to harm me again. Like,
Yes.
I'm done. I've reached,
Yes.
this is the plateau for me.
Hmm.
And having that unbearable thing happen to you manifested a part of you that only pain can actually produce.
Yeah.
And this is really important because
Hmm.
any of us that endures pain has the ability to have parts of ourselves manifest to help
Hmm.
us to survive that may be deemed as unsavory to
Hmm.
society, right?
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
that's one issue, the labeling that comes along from having our behaviors manifest in these ways, which is actually mired in pain. Pain was at the below the surface for all of these behaviors, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
But the other thing, and I think the most powerful thing that carried you forward through manhood was this feeling that you now were bad,
Yeah.
right? As a result of you coping with this violation and
Hmm.
behaving in a way that you even probably couldn't understand a lot of times because you're
Hmm.
just acting from the place of what you know. And it's very animalistic, honestly.
Yes. Yes.
Right? Like when we
Yeah.
think about it, it's like an animal being cornered in a lot of ways.
Yes.
And the
Hmm.
animal is cornered to a certain point. They're going to strike out and do whatever they need to do to survive. Well, we know
Yeah.
that trauma hits the mind, it hits the
Hmm.
soul, it hits the body in exactly these same ways until we get to the point where we can start to look at ourselves and integrate back into
Yeah.
ourselves, not fully the same person that we were, because this painful thing that happened now has
Hmm.
to become integrated. And that's in part what you talk about from a purpose driven standpoint, having your pain be alchemized into your purpose. But we also know so many people don't get to that place.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what I call being born again. Right.
Oh, this is, yes. Come on now. Say
And
that
so
again, King.
and what happens, the bad part is that people fall in love with the survivor. So when you start becoming healed, people kind of look at you like, whoa, who is this? Because the survivor is people pleasing. The survivor is always thinking about others before themselves. The survivor is always looking for ways to hide, looking for ways to make other people happy. But when you start healing, you start self-care, you start setting boundaries, you start telling people no, you start really caring for yourself and demanding more for yourself. And that's when the people that you've gathered around yourself who fell in love with the survivor, Kevin, start leaving you and stop liking you. And so that's why most people don't heal, because the friends and the family members that started liking them because they were the survivor start saying, we don't like that, Kevin. We don't like the heal, Kevin. We like the survivor, Kevin. And so people stay
Mm.
in that traumatized state to keep the people around them that they have been associated with all their lives in that unhealed state. So you'll find that when you become healed, the people that were around you and associated and tolerated that survival you may not be the same people that stick around when you start healing. And
Well,
so
and they
that
won't
becomes,
be. I mean, I
yeah,
think this is critically
yeah,
important
yeah.
because what after trauma happens, right? A
Mhm.
distorted version of ourselves
Yeah,
comes to light. And
yes,
that distorted part of ourselves that comes to light is now riddled with all kinds of behaviors to support us
yes,
in our survival. And
yeah,
we know that based on what the research shows,
mhm,
our what is most important to our life is our connections.
yes, yes,
Without connections, we are literally lost in the
yeah,
desert
yeah,
alone. And so
yeah,
we will go to great lengths in order to maintain connections, even when we know it is literally setting ourselves on fire.
yes,
Even
yes,
when we know that this is not the right way, even when we try. And so this is important because when we say, well, you can just change, we know it's not actually that easy. And I
no,
want to come back to something that you said earlier about all the things that you were doing to try to feel something, right? You're
yeah,
searching. You're
yeah,
searching for something. You want to
yeah,
feel something or not feel at the
yeah,
same time,
yeah,
right? And
yeah,
what we know to be true is that all of us are searching for opportunities to be one with self, to be
yeah,
in connection, to be
yeah,
well, to
mhm,
find joy, to find peace. And we will
yeah,
go to great lengths, but anytime that we're looking for those things outside of ourselves, we will always be shortchanged in the midst of that. And so
yeah,
I love that you name this relationship piece because
yeah,
we know that in order to heal, we have to give up parts of ourselves
Hmm.
that we're rooted in our survival to begin with. And we got to
Yes.
walk into this uncharted place that is
Yes.
scary as hell,
Yeah.
right? Even
Yeah.
when we want to go there, we are petrified of it because we may not want to be here being the yes person,
Hmm.
taking care of everybody else's needs, but we know what that is like. We know what it
Yes.
feels like. And then, particularly, I want to say one more thing, Kevin. What I feel deeply inspired by in general is just your story, but also being a man and being a man from law enforcement,
Yes. Hmm.
knowing that you are not the only man,
Oh
right, who's
no.
had these experiences, but you've been one of the few that have had the courage to say the
Yeah.
things that many people are not willing to say because of all the things mired with admitting that thing to the world,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So, talk to us about why people should do it anyway.
Because it frees you. As long as I walked around with that secret, I could have never been free to be who I am myself. I was always walking around wondering what if someone found out. Or it was to the point where I didn't even think about it. Like it never crossed my mind that it happened. I was so disassociated with myself that I wasn't myself. And then when I told my story for the first time, it's when the first time I felt alive. And so
Mm,
even when I shared it with people that I knew, I wasn't afraid of judgment. It was just basically, I'm gonna be this person who's gonna share his story. But I didn't see it as being okay, the stigma's gonna come, the judgment's gonna come, but it's my story. And I think what most people don't understand is that that's the one thing the victim feel like they have a control over. Because once I share my story, it no longer is my story. The public gets it. And I think a lot of officers and detectives don't understand that. They want the child to share the story. But once the child shares the story, all hell breaks loose. Everything
mm,
changes because now the parent has the story. Who are they going to share it with? Who else is going to know? So one of the things about me sharing my story, I was able to tell it at a time where I was comfortable telling it. And
mm,
so because of that, I think I had a great advantage. I had the advantage. I was already an adult. I was already situated. I was already like in a place where I was ready. Like no matter what came my way, because I tried everything. I tried
mm,
pleasing everybody. That didn't work. So
mhm,
in my mind, it was like, look, what do I have to lose? People don't like the me I am anyway. I get judged anyway. So by the time I shared my story, it was like, I want to help people. I was at that point where I was seeing too much in law enforcement, seeing
mhm,
too much pain anyway. And there was so much commonality between violence and abuse. I was seeing the connection. 8 years on the police, on the road patrolling, asking myself the question, why are people so violent? And then becoming a detective and then seeing the trauma and the childhood abuse and being a detective for so long and seeing some of your victims actually become suspects in violent crimes, you put the connection together. This unresolved trauma is leading to violence in our communities. And so that led me to say, what if we started paying attention? What if we started listening to our children and started listening and opening spaces up so people can talk about their trauma? Could we decrease the violence in our neighborhood? Miriam Greenspan, she said something important. She said, without a concerned listener, the healing process is aborted. And
mm.
we are in a culture that doesn't listen to trauma. We
Yes.
compensate, we medicate, we do everything but listen, right? And so I think we are made to be listening beings. There's no such thing as silence. We're communicating one way or the other. And so by telling my story, I became whole, became healed. And I had to get to the point where it didn't matter who heard my story and how they responded or reacted. It was my story. And so what was interesting, what really caught me off guard, though, the response I wasn't expecting was people were more interested in the person being incarcerated or held responsible than they
Mhm.
were about me getting well and how well I was doing as a result of it.
This is
Yeah,
good.
yeah.
And this is why we have to become more victim centric. It's
Yeah.
not enough to become trauma responsive. Come on
Yeah.
now. I just
Yeah.
feel like the audience
Yeah.
needs to hear that
Yeah.
again,
Yeah.
that
Big.
people cared more about justice, putting people away, which is important. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
Maybe
Yeah.
indeed a survivor decides that because some survivors don't want that. Some
Yeah. They
survivors
don't.
actually say, justice for me is just healing. Justice for me is being able
Yeah.
to move on for my life. But
Yeah.
we can live in a world of healing and justice at the same time.
Yeah.
But the fact
Yeah.
that that rose to the occasion versus you as a human being
Yeah.
who is connected deeply to this story. And what that tells me is that our humanity is fucked
Oh
in
yeah.
some ways,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And we have become so desensitized to
Mhm.
harm, and which is why we don't do enough to protect our children or to protect women or to protect the disabled or to protect, we could talk
Yeah.
about all of the groups who are at
Yeah.
greater susceptibility to
Yeah.
experiencing trauma because we're not listening enough.
Yeah.
And listening is not just about the words that people say. Listening is about how do you observe and take in your environment?
Yes.
How do you
N-
watch your children? How do
Yes.
you pay attention to somebody else's children to also ascertain, are they in danger? How are you listening when couples might be bantering in a way where violence might actually be on the horizon, right?
Yeah.
And I love that you talked about the fact that, we can't talk about violence without talking about survivors. We can't talk
Yeah.
about violence without talking about victims. We can't
Yeah.
talk about violence without talking about trauma. And I
Yeah.
just read a statistics, Kevin, and I know that you probably are already going to be aware of this, that roughly 98% of the
Hmm.
prison population
Hmm.
has endured trauma themselves.
Oh yes. Yes. It's interesting. I tell people, it's interesting that we are not victim informed. We live in a very punitive society. We don't live in a compassionate society. Everybody
Mm,
wants to punish everybody else. And I always use this circle. I tell detectives, I say, you know what? Don't judge because the eyes are horrible listeners. They're great judges, but they're horrible listeners. I always tell them use curiosity as your greatest investigative tool because curiosity leads to a connection, right? Because what happens, curiosity leads to compassion.
mm,
Compassion leads to a connection, and connection leads to communication. Because I give them an example. If I see a homeless person on the street, I can say, oh, that's a bum. They need to get out and get a job. But if I switch that and become curious and say, I wonder why that person is homeless,
yeah.
automatically it shifts my mindset that I'm wondering why they're homeless. I'm more likely to go ask them their name and find out how did they become homeless the way they are. I'm more likely to have compassion rather than judgment. That creates a connection with that person. Automatically, that person and I, we start communicating with each other. I may find out that that person had a job, they fell on hard times. And now, instead of just calling them a bum, I know this is just a person who fell down on their luck and just looking for a break. It all started with curiosity. And so
Yeah.
most of the time in society, we judge before we become curious. And
Mm.
that leads us not to have compassion because we want to punish our way out of our dilemma. You cannot arrest trauma. You can't. You have to be compassionate for what we're going through, and you have to understand what it does to the human psyche and the human body.
Yeah. Well, and what you're naming is that like and compassion can be taught, right? I'm working on a chapter right now for my new book, Love Will
Mm.
Liberate. And I'm working on a piece about boundaries and compassion and vulnerability, all of the things that we're talking about
Yeah.
around connection and knowing trauma interferes with our ability to do many of those things, right?
Yes. Yes.
But I love what you said about don't just listen with the eyes.
Yeah.
And the Four Agreements talks about how curiosity is the
Yeah.
antidote
Oh
for
yeah.
us being able to discover. I always talk about the iceberg when it comes to people. You and I
Hmm.
are having this conversation. We started out where we did, and we've peeled back, right? Some of that
Yeah.
iceberg has melted some because
Yeah.
as we're in conversation with each other, we're peeling back the layers of each
Hmm.
other. But
Hmm.
knowing that even within this short amount of time, we're only going to be able to go so far. But if we
Yeah.
don't go there at all, a 5 minute conversation could be the most powerful conversation if
Oh
only
yeah.
we allow ourselves to lean into curiosity. The reason why we don't do this, and this is where I was going with the Four Agreements, is because
Mm.
our brains are lazy.
Yeah.
We rely on making
Shortcuts.
patterns. A to B
Mm.
equals C, C to D equals
Hmm.
E. But the reality is that people are not equations. You
Yeah,
know,
they're not.
people, we can't say that just because we see this person in this shape or form, that they
Mhm.
are this person because we saw this other person in this shape or form. We have to say,
Yeah.
gosh, I care enough
Mhm.
about people to be curious about their worlds, but we have to care about people. We have to
Yeah.
really, really care about people. And I think that we have to check ourselves, in particular, if we're working with people
Mhm.
and we're in highly intense vicarious trauma environments.
Oh yeah. Oh
We
yeah.
have to really lean into our heart work even more tenaciously, because if not, our hearts are going to be hardened by the pain that we're witnessing.
Hmm. Yeah, it is because we don't know how to listen. Like when we go to a therapist, we talk to the therapist and we expect the therapist to give us something back. But if you notice during that whole hour, there's no listening. There's a back and forth. And
Mm.
so listening becomes the cure. Studies have shown people who have a prayer life or some type of meditative life, they're healthier. They feel more happy. Why? Because they feel like they've been listened to, not being told what to do. There's no you're not trying to solve me. You're listening to me, right? That's part of the healing process. Can you hear? Can you feel? Can you listen to my pain? I go back to that Job text, and Job friends tried to get him to do things and correct, but they couldn't listen, right?
Yeah.
And so, and a lot of people can't listen,
Mhm.
particularly those closest to you, because they want to fix you. And the reason people closest to you want to fix you because your pain actually engages theirs. It hurts to see you hurt because now by you hurting them, watching you hurt, they got to feel their own pain. It's almost like an invitation. And they don't want that.
Absolutely.
They want to numb out. They want to let's go to the club, let's have a drink, especially with men. You start crying in front of a man and you're a man, they be like, hey man, chill out, grab a beer, right? They don't want to feel, right? But can they sit with you? Healing requires,
Yes.
even in our churches, everything, if you look at church, everything is rah, rah, rah from the day, but once you get in the door, it's sing, throw your hands up, step, clap, 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 preach, 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 offering you out. There's no sitting and listening, right?
Mm.
There's no still time. We have created a culture where we're so busy. We're in and out. Our service, let's get the next service in. Our service, let's get the next service in. We're constantly told to distract, distract, distract. We
Yeah.
do anything to feel our pain. And so our business is keeping us from healing.
Yeah, and we're addicted, right? We're
Oh,
addicted. And
yeah.
also, if we're talking about it from a neuroscience perspective,
Hmm.
the reason why the person who needs to heal doesn't slow down is because literally their nervous system is overactivated, right?
Yes.
And
Hmm.
we know that if it's years of trauma, it takes years of healing. And we can do so from an individual standpoint, but also in community. And so I love what you said about men, right? Especially men.
Hmm.
So, what tips do you have for men out there who are survivors themselves and or maybe not a survivor, but just not comfortable in the emotional aspects of what it means to be fully human? I'm actually working on a whole chapter called We Need Balance Between the Sacred Masculine and the Divine Feminine, to have optimal relationships, right? And trauma prevents us from having that. And no matter what gender we are, we have masculine energy and we have feminine
Hmm.
energy. And there's very specific characteristics that are
Hmm.
associated with each of these, right?
Yeah.
So, what do you have to say to survivors in general, but more specifically male survivors and more specifically men in general,
Hmm.
about what more you're inviting them in to do so that we can tap into this part of ourselves, this sacred part of ourselves that is critical to our full humanness?
Yeah, I would say I would invite them to stop asking for permission to feel. Get a journal if you don't have that person that you need to be open and honest with. Some men can't even be open and honest with their wives because they feel they'll
Mm.
be judged because we've created this so toxic masculine culture that you have to be this way, that way, or this way. I always tell men, if you can't find someone you can be honest about your emotions with, do it in a journal, establish some type of prayer life if that's your thing. But the thing is, you cannot hold on to these feelings and not be affected by it because you're going to act it out. Whatever you hold in, you push out. So if you're going to hold in your pain, you're going to hold in your anxiety, you're going to push it out in a form of destructive behavior. And so if you want to be the man that people can say, hey, that's an upstanding guy, then you're going to need to deal with your emotions in some way, shape, or form. Get around guys who are not judging you. And like I said, if you're not comfortable with that yet, get you a journal, write it out, be honest with yourself. Don't keep that stuff inside of you, because again, you have to pay attention to how you feel, because emotions are energy. And if you know anything about science and energy cannot be destroyed. Once it's created, it has to go somewhere. It only gets transferred. So once you have a feeling, it's got to go somewhere. You can't destroy it. So if I'm angry, it got to go somewhere. I'm going to hit a wall, I'm going to hit something, I'm going to do something to make that anger go away, to make it dissipate. So you feel you got to do something about it. It doesn't just go away. So I tell men, find something constructive to do. If you don't find something constructive to do with your emotions, you're going to be destructive. And so for my men out there, listen, you were created to feel. It's not that you don't have feelings, you have them. It's just that you find ways to not feel those feelings. And if you keep doing that, your body is going to take on. That's why men, they get sicker quicker. You see an older couple, you always see the older female leading the older man around, because the man didn't take care of himself, because they didn't like to feel. That's why typically women live longer. Right? You'll see a couple, the woman will look a lot younger, right? Because what women do, they get around their girlfriends, they have book clubs, they talk, they do things men don't do. And you would think men would look at women and learn from them, but we don't, right? We'll say, oh, that's not masculine, but something for them is working, right? Women talk about their pain, talk about their feelings. Men talk about sports, anything outside of themselves. And there's a reason, right? Women are less violent. It's a reason women are less likely to abuse drugs. There's a reason for that. And if you study that, it's because men hold their feelings in and they try to act out their feelings and their emotions rather than speak them out.
Yeah, this is really, really good. I just heard the author Jason Reynolds speak, and he said that he's been running from masculinity as long as he's been running from racism.
Yeah.
And what he was naming is the very thing that you're talking about right now, right? And so of course what I interpreted that as is he's not actually running from masculinity. He's running from the way that masculinity has been defined to him. He's running from the parts of himself that he felt like he couldn't be, that he couldn't uphold because of this distortion around what it means to be man, right?
Yeah.
And the reality is that all of us are supposed to experience those full range of emotions that you talked about, right?
Yeah.
I use the emotional guidance scale in my work often to give people a gauge into understanding that, we have all these emotions are normal, and our goal is to feel all of them and to allow those lower vibrational emotions, things like depression and sadness and jealousy and anger, to matriculate through us as quickly as possible, so that the very thing that you just talked about doesn't happen, Kevin, so that the body doesn't become at war with itself, right? Because whatever doesn't come out, and this is why trauma in itself is not problematic alone, it's the aftermath of trauma. Where does the pain go that now I feel on a cellular level in my body that has the ability to affect every single major organ system in my body? And so thank you for that message to the men, because if we've got to get in sacred spaces where we all have an opportunity to get out the things that we're holding on to. And like you said, there are some men that are in these beautiful, loving relationships and still don't feel comfortable sharing their truth, right? And so we got to get past that for our sake and for the sake of the love that the people around us are worthy of, and that we too are worthy of receiving, that we block when we don't get in tune and express our emotions and our pain in the ways that we were intended to.
Yeah, and I think we created a culture where we're trying not to get there because we want everything to be based off physicality. We'll talk about, how good the sex is. We'll talk about how good a person looks, how good of a shape they're in, what they look like. But when you ask the person, how's the connection? And they'll look at you, what connection? And they'll go back to the same things that they told you before. The sex is good, that he's looked good, or he does this, or she does this. She'll talk about those things, but you want to say, well, I'm talking about a more intimate level. I'm talking about intimacy as far as how much can you share about who you are to this person. And I'm talking about all the stuff, and can you be accepted? Because one thing I found out we do is when we get together, say for instance, my mate cheats on me. The first thing we want to do is get rid of. We don't ask them to come curious, what made you feel like you needed to do that? Because
Mm,
oftentimes pain has led to something they felt like they couldn't get from me. I caused them some pain and they wanted to make me pay for the pain or thought they can get something out of another relationship that they couldn't get from me.
mhm.
Instead of being curious about that, we want to punish the person, say, you know what, I'm going to show you, I'm either get rid of you or I'm going to go out and do something else to balance what you did to me.
Mhm.
And so what ends up happening is we bounce from relationship to relationship to relationship, only to find out that the person we get in a new relationship with, we still have to deal with that unresolved trauma that we
Yeah.
thought was coming from them, but was really coming from us. And so the person was reacting to our trauma and we didn't even know it. And so
Yeah.
we never get a chance to heal because we never sit long enough in the conditions in our pain to see what the pain is doing to us. And so that's why I tell people about marriage. If you're really in a God-given marriage, you're going to go through some stuff where it's going to require you to deal with your trauma. And I put that in one of my books. I said, we meet on dates, but our trauma meet in relationships. Until you get into a real relationship, you're not going to know your trauma because you're going to be fake. You're gonna present your true self. But when you get in a real relationship with that mate, your loved one holds you accountable and start asking questions. And really, that's where intimacy comes in. Let me peel back. Instead of judging you, I want to see. And so make the person comfortable enough where they can really see the heart that you're trying to give to them.
Yes, intimacy does reveal all these parts of ourselves that are unconscious to ourselves. I mean,
Mhm.
relationships are our biggest spiritual teachers, and
Oh,
they
yeah.
have the power to help us to rise so
Hmm.
high, and they also have the ability to really bring us low,
Yeah,
right?
that's
And
true,
so I
sir.
love that you said God given, source given. Like if it's that, and all relationships are spiritual because even the ones that bring us low, they're bringing us low for a reason,
Yeah, they
right?
teach us a lesson. Yeah, they prepare
Period.
you for the relationship. But
That's
if you
right.
always stay mad, that's why in my book, my new book, Forgiving Trauma, I talk about
Mm,
that. I say that you have to forgive trauma because if not, you're holding on to something that happened to you way back then. But it was lessons that my previous mates taught me that prepared me for my wife. Because
yeah.
if I was still the way I was when I was dating back then, me and my wife wouldn't be together because I would be making mistakes now that I didn't learn from then. Right. So those other mates taught me something about myself I didn't know back then that I know now that I needed to work on now. So it made me a better person, some things I needed to work on. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
none of
So,
it, right? It's all
yeah.
a part of the collective. So, as we get ready to wrap up, you
Mhm.
founded the 12 Project to educate
Mhm.
communities on trauma. Why
Yeah.
12? What meaning does that number carry for you?
Well, in number 12, I was reading the Bible and I saw Jesus, he summoned the 12 disciples and he gave them power over abusive spirits. And I thought that was interesting. I was like, wow, everybody talk about the Great Commission, go out and make disciples, but that's not what Jesus really wanted them to do. Jesus was about healing, and part of healing is education. People
Mm,
forget Jesus was a rabbi. He was a teacher, and he taught and he healed. And so when I saw that he called and some of the 12 disciples, because of that, I was like, wow, that's amazing. And plus, my assault happened at 12 years old.
mm,
That was one of the main reasons, but also my assault happened at 12. And
mm,
then I saw that 12, you got the 12 tribes of Israel, the 12 disciples, and 12 jurors. So 12 represents justice, it represents
mm.
completion, government justice. So I kept with the 12 because I wanted to bring justice to underserved communities. Because I was speaking at conferences with social workers and lawyers, detectives, and police officers, people who were doing the work, who knew about trauma, but nobody was going into these underserved communities and providing this information for free where the people needed it the most. So when they got to sit on jurors, they already had some type of working information about what was happening to these victims when the officers got up and testified. So that's why the 12 Project was created to actually educate underserved communities. We go out, and we feed the people, right? We'll say, we're going to pay for your lunch and everything. We just want you to come in. We're going to teach you about ACEs, adverse child experiences study. We're going to teach you about trauma, and we keep it simplistic. We keep it fun. We tell the pastors, invite your people, right? We want to educate them. We're going to feed, educate. It's a lunch and learn. So that's what we do. We do it for free. We don't charge communities. We
Wow.
take the hit, and so we don't. I'm following the Jesus model when he fed the 5,000. That's where that model comes from. Feeding the
Wow.
people what I think is going to change our communities. So that's what the 12 Project does.
Wow, so beautiful. And
Mm-hmm.
just breaking down all of the connections to why 12 was the right number for you to name your project.
Yes, ma'am.
So as we get ready to officially wrap up, what final piece of inspiration and or advice do you have for listeners, particularly men that are out there who haven't began to face their work of healing related to their past trauma?
I would say that you have to heal. And the only way to heal is to face your pain. I know a lot of brothers out there that are doing everything in their power. And notice I said power to try to heal. But the best way to heal is through vulnerability. It's the greatest strength you have. And I know that sounds kind of cultural and it sounds weird,
Mhm.
but I heal through allowing myself to let go of the things that I felt I was in control of. And one of those things was my image. I was so concerned about image and how other people saw me. But I knew that I was feeling, I knew I was hurting. So I started journaling, first of all. That led into me writing books. So I got those feelings out of me. Find a way to express yourself, even if it's
Mhm.
to yourself. And that's the most important thing. Express your pain, express yourself to yourself. If you have to get a notebook, if you have to do it on your phone, and you'll find that as a result of that, you'll become more expressive to others. You'll start noticing how people express themselves to one another, and you'll become more fluent at doing so. And I
Yeah.
just say, make sure you surround yourself with other brothers who are actually, supportive of what you're trying to do, and let people know what you're trying to do. And because community is very important when it comes to healing.
Yeah. Well, and I love that you just emphasized expression. I've
Mhm.
had countless conversations about trauma, and this is the first time that expression has been named, right,
Yeah.
as a activation. And I think
Hmm.
this is critically important because anytime that we experience pain, one of the things that happens is that our throat chakra, along with our sacral, which is the form
Hmm.
of creativity, it gets blocked, right? Our heart gets blocked. We
Hmm.
experience blockage in all kinds of ways.
Hmm.
And that creative expression begins to bring us back to ourselves. This is why art and music and dance are forms of effective therapeutic modalities, because
Yep.
anytime we're moving the body, we're breathing, we're actually integrating back into self, right?
Yeah.
All of those things help to support us. And if we have a journal when we're writing, what the brain is ignited during writing is very different
Hmm.
than when we're typing, right? So that's
Yep.
a bonus if we can actually put it pen to paper. And so thank you for that beautiful offering, Kevin. That was really, really rich.
No, no problem. I always tell people the word was created with words,
Mm,
expression,
yeah.
right? And so the way you express yourself, and there's another scripture, people look at scripture just as Christian, but Eastern cultures also use those scriptures where it says, uh, life and death is in the power of the tongue.
Hmm.
And that's true. And so you can express yourself to life, careful what you say, in silence, you can silence yourself to death too.
So, I just love what you said about expression, in that, we can always use expression to also articulate through affirmation the things that we are wanting to bring into our lives, and reframing some of the negative ideas and the false ideas we've taken on
Mhm.
about ourselves in the midst of our trauma, like we're not worthy or we're not loved. And we
Yeah.
can literally take those things and sit with, I am loved,
Yeah.
and the words, and allowing it to permeate us, and all the, how affirmations help us to rewire our thinking. And if we
Mhm.
can rewire our thinking, we can literally create new synapses, and to be one again. I'm going to come back to being one with self. So thank you again,
Yeah.
Kevin.
No
I'm so
problem.
grateful for this conversation.
Thank you.
And to the entire audience, I want to share my deep gratitude for you tuning in today. I hope the insights shared by myself and Kevin have opened new pathways towards your healing and liberation. If either of us can assist you on your journey, please don't hesitate to reach out. Also, be sure to tune in to the 100+ additional episodes that we have on the Be Well Beautiful People podcast. If you found value in today's session, show us some love by telling your people about it, rate our YouTube channel, and listen to us on all major podcast platforms, including Amazon, Apple, and the like. And you're always welcome to share your thoughts with us directly at info@bewellbeautifulpeople.org. And if you haven't already picked up my memoir, Me Too, A Therapist's Journey to Heal, Find Liberation and Joy, along with Kevin's book that he named, and we'll make sure that you get the links to all of the juicy written materials that he's got out there in support of your healing and liberation. We invite you to grab those copies, and you can also listen to my book via audiobook by connecting with us at damarawest.com. We're going to leave you with the words of Resmaa Menakem. At its best, activism is a form of healing. It is about what we do and how we show up in the world. It is about learning and expressing regard, compassion, and love. Until next time, beautiful people. Ashe.